Well, let's get started. Hello, and welcome to our session on building systems interoperability. My name is Josh Felperin, and I'm excited to be moderating this discussion today. I've been in the building automations industry for about 15 years. 13 of those years I was with Siemens, and I'm currently the global sales director at alpscontrols.com. So it's no secret, it's no longer news that global building developers are required to ensure that the buildings they design and construct are expected to be sustainable and energy efficient. However, it's widely believed across the globe that buildings underperform in terms of capacity to deliver value, even in the face of all these new technologies that we've seen here this week, that we will see here this week. There's so many new and innovative technologies and can be operated and maintained long into the future, but it's yet to be given the desired attention. So when it comes to buildings, there's so many disparate systems and variables which need to be considered up front. And coordination are very challenging to orchestrate. I'm joined today by what I would call some of our top industry experts to provide some clarity and lessons learned so you can truly envision how together we can begin to solve this problem. So let's kick things off first by introducing our panel today. Marc, Petock, why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Josh, and thanks to the Smart Buildings Exchange for inviting me. My name is Marc Petock. I'm the Chief Marketing Communication Officer for Lynxspring. I'm also one of the original founders and board members for Project Haystack, and look forward to our discussion with this great panel. Thank you.
Awesome. Welcome, Marc. What about Tearle?
Thanks, Josh. Good day to all, and appreciate the opportunity to speak with these other three fine gentlemen and share the conversation and the experience. I am Tearle Whitson, 15, 20 plus years in the facility engineering and automation engineering business. A lot of time focused supporting Microsoft for many years with their smart buildings deployments. Many years with CBRE, and now most recently having recently joined DB Engineering as Director of Smart Building Solutions.
Excellent. Congratulations on the new role, Tearle.
Thank you. Looking forward to it. It's like coming home to an old family. Many of them I've known and worked with for many years.
Oh, that's awesome. Great to hear. Good luck. James?
Thanks, Josh. Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. I'm James Dice. I run Nexus Labs. Nexus Labs is a newsletter, podcast, community, an online course for smart buildings. And we can find us at nexuslabs.online.
All right, great. And last but not least, John Petze.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for this opportunity, Josh. Appreciate it. John Petze, I am the co-founder of SkyFoundry and also one of the original founders and a board member in Project Haystack, which we'll end up commenting on today. So we're looking forward to this discussion. Thanks.
All right. I think we all are. Well, welcome, panelists. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your days to be here with us. We've got a lot to cover in 90 minutes and a very complex problem, as we all know. So, we definitely want to cover a couple of different cases, kind of give you an idea of the complexities that go in to making these buildings interoperability and bringing that vision to the reality. So we'll start off with Marc Petock, who's got a great example of a recent project that he just completed.
So thanks, Josh. Again, greatly appreciated. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. I wanted to start off with just a couple of statements around interoperability today. So in preparing for the conversation today, so I looked at it and said, so what is interoperability today? Really simplified, it's the ability for systems, devices, equipment, sensors, and applications, no matter the manufacturer, to be able to connect, communicate, translate, and exchange data across different boundaries, first and foremost, different people, and the wide majority of stakeholders that are part of our smarter buildings today.
Hey,
Today's
Marc,
systems. Interoperability includes all operational systems within the building, but also encompasses the whole facility management systems, the newer aspect of our smart buildings, the workplace, and even extend to the utility grid. Increasingly practical way for building owners and operators and facility executives to achieve a range of benefits, including increased comfort, health, safety, greater energy efficiency, improved operations, performance, and productivity.
Hey,
Really,
Marc,
yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Can you share, ensure your screen's being shared?
Oh, I apologize to everybody. My, let's see. Bear with me.
There we go.
How about now? Sorry, guys.
Yeah, perfect.
All right. So when we're looking at interoperability, it's what I just said is more about, improved operational performance, productivity. It's really the business outcomes. And I think that's something that everybody today needs to keep in mind. It's no longer just a technology challenge or a technology issue, but it's business outcomes. And interoperability is not just a nice to have, but today it's really transitioning into a must have and becomes an integral part of the building strategy, the smart building strategy and design. And it really is a major contributor to a building being smart or moving to the newer aspect, smarter buildings. So let me give you a case example here. And I think this is an unusual case in that this is not a campus. This is not a multi-site. This is a single, new, unique building that in this case was built from the ground up. It's 545 Wynn, and it's really the beginning of creating Miami's new standard in creative offices. So let's look at the interoperability part of 545 Wynn. First, interoperability was really discussed and baked at the beginning and part of the original strategy and design of this building. And it was not only the systems or equipment or the devices and the data, but also, of course, as I mentioned earlier, the workplace. But this interoperability included, and it was a must-have, the surrounding neighborhood environment. So the type of building, it was a new construction, as I mentioned, commercial office and retail, roughly 298,000 square feet, consisted of 10 stories. It was earmarked as a Class A office building with, as I said, upscale retail. Located in Miami's lively, energetic Wynwood Art District neighborhood, and had all the modern amenities demanded and expected by tenants and occupants in today's built environment. So what were the goals? And I think you have to start in looking at a case history, looking at some of the goals. So one was to elevate Miami's typical office experience. And they were truly trying to attract the tech type tenants for that really were starting to become more engaged with the general vicinity in which the office building was built. To establish a live and play type vibrant environment that really fit into the culture, the vibrancy, and the uniqueness of where the building was constructed. Design a flexible structure that had picked up the character of the neighborhood and really picked up that vibe. And again, I keep going back to that. That was part of this whole interoperability efforts, not just the equipment or the system, but really be part of the culture and the vibe in which the place was located. And ultimately, yes, they wanted to have an energy efficient, lower operating cost building, but again, create one that truly was smarter. Some of the requirements were the 24-hour internet-based monitoring, single source solution that provided graphics, easy access to manage and operate the building. So as we move through this case history, let's look at those outcomes. And again, I mentioned the outcomes early on as an integral part of interoperability today. So one, they achieved being able to attract the types of tenants they wanted. They included Apple, TikTok, Spotify, Google, so forth and so on. And what was interesting is that they also attracted the architect and the designers of the building to move in here as well. They had a variety of retailers and restaurants that completely sold out of the retail space. Made interoperable all the building control equipment and services, seamlessly monitor that equipment remotely, be able to generate the valuable data that was housed in them. And facility staff could then immediately start picking up from interoperability the energy values that were optimally set and achieved, and was able to control all the different systems. And most importantly, that the systems were running and operating as designed. In other words, the pre-identified KPIs were being reached. So ultimately, again, I hope that gives you an example of how interoperability today is utilized not only in the equipment and the systems, but takes into account many other factors. With that, Josh, I'll turn it back over to you.
Oh, great example, Marc. Thank you very, very much for sharing that with us. Let's move on to the next case study, Tearle.
All right. Thank you, Josh. And thank you, Marc, for leading in with that. Let's see. Go. And hopefully you're getting the presentation coming up. Really going to take and expand on what Marc's use case idea and highlight some of the elements and components that are part of what would be all of the factors that come together in the field and on the back end with the supporting teams, and ultimately lead towards people, places, and things of the outcomes of what we're trying to do with interoperable systems. James and John are both going to take this into another level and discuss the various levels of the hierarchy and features regarding haystack, and when we get into schema and ontology. This is very typical of what we're seeing here of the ability, the need to collect all the data, whether it's physical hard points, whether it's application-based, software to software, get the data, transform it into a standardized format. What are we doing with it? Manage it, analyze it, bring it into a visual use case, and decide on these to bring out the outcomes that are needed to deliver what's behind the scenes. And it's really each of these stages, we can break into multiple personas of who does this and who is needed to help and gather this, and at what point, what are they looking to solve for? So as we take each of these elements, you can look at it really from the holistic building perspective of really starting from engagement of whether it's a master system integrator, whether it is an outsourcing activity with corporate real estate company, facility manager, the portfolio manager, ultimately a corporate real estate manager is going to engage with the need to understand what we're doing with the data, what has to happen with the data, and then build it into a process that you get results. We focused in the past on building engineering. Much of the past decade has really had a direct lens, starting with building engineering, building automation systems, fault detection, how do we save energy? Over time, especially in current phase as we've moved into hybrid workplace, Darlene mentioned a lot of that transition earlier today with as the different interests of all of the different personas and the parties that come together as we look at, say, a chief sustainability officer, as we look at executive admin, occupancy planning, all of these elements that have to bring the interoperable components together, collecting and transforming, managing, analyzing, visualizing, and deciding. These pieces have to suit the needs and generate the outcomes that are sought by those personas. Over the years, coming from a hard system, mechanical, and automation background, I would often approach this with an engineering brain, and I would go into aspects of delivery, and I'd find later that I might come at it with one solution, but as we interviewed and discussed the needs with the teams in the field, the occupants in the building, the other regions, as we started to deploy some of these types of solutions, we'd find that they had different interests and they had different outcomes and different approaches, and all of that has to come together as part of the interoperability package. We a lot of times really get focused on the ones and the zeros and the protocols and how things are converting and how they're being how they're directly connecting and communicating. Where are we storing the data? At the end of the day, we have to come back to the systems have to interoperate because of the outcomes we're seeking based upon those personas and the delivery that has to happen with these systems and supporting those personas. Taking a use case that highlights a delivery I supported at Microsoft, it was one of the ones where I would say it went beyond a standard fault detection, a smart buildings delivery. And we started to really see the convergence of multiple systems. Within that portfolio, we started to see, yes, we had BMS and power integration, had lighting integration, pretty typical for a smart building, but working very closely between the OT teams, my support teams, my engineering teams and system integrators, with Microsoft IT resources and their corporate service engineering organization, we were able to really start to bring in other factors, not only in a on-site kiosk, but into an experiential app for wayfinding, temperature adjustments with a third-party partner such as Comfy, bringing in enhanced platform capability through leak detection, fire extinguisher monitoring, room availability via Exchange. All of these other service elements started to come together in the app and in the kiosk. And it took the collaboration, very close collaboration between IT and OT to consistently approach this and evaluate how that delivery looks. This element was something that was going to be carried forward and is now being delivered. You're going to hear, Microsoft speakers at various times. They're going to talk about their campus modernization program and where the digital transformation aspects of that are being delivered. And much of that was built from this initial pass at really core system interoperability and overlap and the alignment between IT and OT groups. With those pieces, I'm going to just kick it over to James that we're going to take a deeper dive and all of those aspects that have to be handled really at your core application, at the system integration, and then ultimately John's going to really bring it home with taking it, how do these systems communicate to each other, and how do you align all of those other aspects? Josh, I'll throw it back to you.
All right, James is ready. That's a good segue. James, you ready?
Great segue. Well done, Josh. Yeah, I'll jump right in. Thanks, Tearle. All right. So I'm curious how Tearle and I's presentations are going to dovetail. Maybe we can unpack it at the end. So I'm going to add a little bit here with some thoughts on what might be included in a strategy for interoperability from the building owner's perspective. And I should say before I begin that this is not necessarily a case study like you guys presented. It's more of I'm being the messenger from what I've learned from the Nexus Labs community through our monthly gatherings with all of our members and through 120 plus podcast interviews I've done with the leaders across the industry. And some of this should be some good fodder for our discussion on why interoperability isn't necessarily solved yet today. To begin, we have to first understand the architecture that's prevalent in most buildings today, right? And I call that a siloed vertical architecture. These building systems exist to provide the core outcomes building owners need, as I don't think it's going to be new to anyone in the audience here. Tearle called these outcomes, right? These are the outcomes that we need. We need a productive, safe, healthy, efficient, comfortable, collaborative occupant experience. So the experience that I have when I walk in, I need to minimize carbon emissions. I need minimal expenses. I need to maximize my revenue. Those are the outcomes we're looking for out of these systems. But right now, in most buildings today, you know, new and old, except for maybe the case study Marc presented there, these buildings could do a much better job at achieving those outcomes, right? So that's kind of what we want to talk about today. It's kind of the theme of the day. And that's where our new technology use cases come in, as Tearle has described here. We need new technology to supplement those silos in a way that closes this gap here that I have on this slide. Essentially, this gap is I have use cases, I need to raise my level of my outcomes, and I have this all these existing systems that don't necessarily provide those use cases out. Misunderstood about interoperability. My friend Corey Mosiman said he thinks one of the most misunderstood points is that interoperability is very use case specific. So having clearly defined goals for what you're intending to achieve when defining an interoperability strategy and interoperability scope, because there are almost always different options and overlapping standards on how you fill that gap. And then practically speaking, most smart building solutions today need to solve that silo problem by integrating with existing systems in the portfolio. So Tearle had his slide that showed this in a horizontal kind of flowchart sort of way. I'm showing this vertically, basically pulling data out or communicating with our underlying silos. So most people accomplish this using overlay software. An overlay, by definition, will sit on top of existing systems or applications to allow access to data and functionality from those underlying systems. And this is important for our discussion here today because most vendors currently create interoperability only to enable one use case provided by one application typically, which is theirs, right? And when a bunch of different overlay vendors approach interoperability in that way, it simply creates new silos, right? You might call it point solution spaghetti, I think someone told me at some point, right? So these vendors often claim to create interoperability, but they're only doing it for one use case, usually for one stakeholder. And a lot of times these vendors also claim to have an API, but it's not a silver bullet to create interoperability for many different reasons, perhaps that will unpack later today. So I'm seeing this trend, and I didn't make up this trend. I'm just sort of the messenger again. So this trend that's I'm calling the horizontal architecture. So building owners are realizing they don't want to buy redundant layers of the stack from different application vendors. They want any application they buy now, today, and in the future to share common infrastructure that's designed for flexible communication between these different horizontal layers. So let's walk through it real quick from top to bottom. The device layer is the bottom, right? It's not just those traditional silos. We also have all these new devices, all these new connections, all of these batteries, power supplies, and other dependencies. And owners are left with a double-edged sword. They must abstract away all the complexity at the edge to enable their outcomes they want, but they also must fully respect that complexity and treat it with the detail that it deserves. And at this layer, and maybe this is something we can unpack in our discussion later today, I believe most device manufacturers are doing the bare minimum. And interoperability as a movement would progress much faster if they were leaders rather than people that were kind of pulling along as we go here. Next up in the horizontal architecture is the network layer. And this is the most overlooked layer, I'd say, from my standpoint. The network layer is vital for passing data up and down across the stack. Network problems hold the industry back, making smart buildings look risky, delaying project successes, increasing costs, and usually making stakeholders question whether the smart building's juice is worth the squeeze, right? So what we need is a dedicated layer with its own hardware, software, standard operating procedures, and key stakeholders who kind of take responsibility for that data being passed across the network. And I think what we've landed on is it should be a converged network. It should be monitored, maintained, and have redundancy to ensure the uptime of the use cases that we're trying to implement. Next is the data layer. I realize that a lot of vendors have a data layer as part of their application stack, but I believe the data layer should be independent from the application layer. In other words, an independent data layer, an IDL. That gives the owner integration savings, better ability to manage this layer over time, and then it gives them choice at the application layer, which is next. But first, the data model. In order for our applications to do their thing, they're going to need context. And John is going to talk more about this in just a second. The applications need a way to understand all the data they're consuming, including all the underlying devices and how they fit together into a system of systems. And obviously, a vital part of this is the standard data modeling efforts like Haystack, which is the original, but now being joined by others. Finally, the application layer sort of sits on top of the IDL and provides outcomes to users through applications such as mobile apps, web apps, or process-based applications to help you work through your different workflows. And this is what sits on top of the infrastructure from the previous slides. And it's really what is enabled by interoperability. And I think as I close out, the thing I'd like to stress is that when people start down their smart buildings journey, they're often starting here, when really this layer is enabled by everything that you've done before, kind of getting all that infrastructure ready to enable the application. So I'll stop there, and I'm excited for John's presentation and for our discussion.
Thanks, James. Hey, Josh.
Hey.
Hang on a moment here.
I know you've been here before.
All right, let's see if we can do it today.
We can see your screen. Thanks, John.
Okay. Well, yeah. So I think let's track kind of the context of where we've been. We've seen the end result in a premier building. We've seen how huge Can is moving their facilities that we have to resolve to get interoperability. Now I'm going to talk about, one of the gory details, if you will, of how do we make data from all these diverse systems easy to work with. And, I'm speaking from the point of view of Project Haystack, where I'm a board member and one of the original contributing founders of the effort. So let's talk about this briefly here. I want to open with this, that, and I think we're seeing it now in the industry. Data is being appreciated. Data is fundamental to everything that we need to do to address our critical sustainability goals and to make buildings desirable, comfortable, and productive. So data is really essential. There should be, I would think, no argument or debate about that. And as we saw in James' presentation, we have all of these different systems producing data. And that leads us to some challenges, And, we can access these data, right? The data from these different systems, typically, some more difficult than others, but, most of them have some level of standard protocol or open API, right? But the challenge is having access to data is actually not the same thing as making meaningful use of that data and achieving the interoperability that we want so that we can effectively use that data to improve operational performance, workplace experience, et cetera. And we really need to be able to use it across multiple applications, as James said, so we're not duplicating layers of the stack. And while we might have a point solution, the work we do to get to that should be usable for other point solutions, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with the understanding that certain constituents, all they need is a specific point solution. But we shouldn't be building an entire stack just for that if we can possibly avoid it. So the challenge we have, right? We have protocols, but we have a lot of them. They're different. And they also give you different data formats and different software interfaces. And the end result here is that most of the data produced by devices and equipment in our facilities doesn't have descriptive information in any uniform way to define what it means. People talk about names, and one of the things I want to point out is two things. Number one, Project Haystack isn't about standard naming conventions. And the reason for that is names can't possibly do the job, right? My name is John Petze. That doesn't tell you anything about all the other attributes of me and my life. Same thing with a name in a BMS or fire system or lighting, right? So what we need is a standardized approach for adding that information, semantic data, metadata, so that we can do it in a standardized way to all of the data in all of those different silos, right? Because if we don't have a standardized approach, we have, I would say, what the industry's been experiencing, which is a lot of effort is required. There's a manual, labor-intensive effort to figure out, what does this piece of information mean? What piece of equipment did it come from? Where does it need to go to another system? And this has been one of the key barriers, I believe, in helping building owners take advantage of all the new technology that's available to them. It really has formed a barrier to the effective use of the data out of systems, because it adds costs and gets to James's point about, is the juice worth the squeeze? Well, if there's too much, effort, then the answer is no. Well, what if we can make it easier? And that's really what Project Haystack is about, and what tagging in general is about. So, very simply, tagging is not a complex subject, really, at a conceptual level. It simply means that we're going to add meaning, descriptors, you might think of them as attributes. We're going to add them to the data that we have in the different systems. And, some typical examples. One of the ones people often don't think about: units of measure. I like to say, numbers actually have no meaning. Without units, a number has no meaning. So units is a simple example of a descriptor, an attribute, and there's tags for that. But another thing might be the association with equipment systems. I have a temperature sensor. What room is it measuring? What piece of equipment is feeding it? And so data tagging with a standard approach in our equipment data understand what the individual pieces of data are, then we know which ones we need, where we want to take them, what we want to do with them. And so we can support these value-added external applications. And that might be analytics, it might be graphics. For years, the equipment graphics have been a significant cost element of implementing a BMS, because somebody had to assemble all of this. If the data is effectively tagged, graphics can auto-assemble, eliminate workflow, CMMS, work order management, et cetera. That's the role of data tagging. All right, so where does Project Haystack fit? And what it does is provide a standard methodology for how we're going to do this. And, it's built around the concept of a tag, just like you might go through if you were doing an inventory and tag all the boxes and all the bins with what's in them, so that the next person to come through would know, well, we're going to tag the data coming out of the different systems so that the next person or process or software application can know what that data is and what it means. And so the tags are the thing that I guess the user sees, but it's part of a data model that's been designed to support full description of systems and devices and their relationships. So it gets at the concept of ontology and taxonomy and inference and relationships, et cetera. Big words. But here's the most important thing. I think an easy way to understand both what tagging is and how important it is think of it as a markup language for data. Let me go through an example. Why can I point my browser at your website and read what you've published, right? We didn't prearrange or have our engineers meet and say, what's the API so I'll be able to interpret the text on your page. We couldn't have the world we have today if that's what was required. And it works because the industry, the IT industry, agreed on a standard markup language that we all use, HTML. So if you write your website with HTML and follow the rules, I can read it like magic. Well, Haystack really does the same thing for device data. If your data is tagged, then other applications can read it, understand it, and utilize it for whatever purpose they really are after. So a quick use case here. Here's a name you might see in a BMS system, ZN3-WWFL4. What is it? Well, if you're intimately knowledgeable of the building, you might know, but now be a third-party provider. What does that mean? Oh, it has a number associated with it, 24.6. 24.6 what? Degrees? C, F, kilowatts, kilopascals, right? So we need first units, right? So if we say it's 24.6 degrees centigrade, then is it okay? Well, how do we know? What is it? Is it a zone temperature, return temp, the chilled water supply? If it's a zone, we might say, well, yeah, it's okay, but well, maybe it's okay during the day, but not okay at night, or vice versa. And if we want to go chase that down, we'd need to know, well, what air handler is serving that unit and what VAV box is serving that unit. You'd need to deal with all of these things to work with that name, ZN3, and that value. But what we want to do is convey this information in a standard way so that other software can just directly interpret it. And that's what Haystack tagging does. Here's a quick example, right? We have point names, right? HU1.SAT. But the tags that describe what that means would be sensor. It's a sensor. It's measuring discharge of air. It's measuring temperature in degrees Fahrenheit. And then finally, there's a tag for references. What air handler? So the HU ref is air handler 1. That's a real example of using tagging to describe a point in a system. And if I have all of that information, then I have all of the answers to the question that I just posed on the previous slide. All right, so that's what it's about. Why is it important? Well, it gets to the business, the business outcomes we're after. We need to represent meaning in a consistent, standardized way, and we want to do it once. We don't want to have to redo it for every application. And we need to represent not just what's considered the vocabulary of tags. We need to represent interrelationships and taxonomy and the hierarchy of our systems. And we want to provide data in an organized fashion that other applications can get to, with the end goal of enabling interoperability. So that's why we think it's important. So now I want to comment on, the adoption. This effort, Project Haystack, was started in March of 2011 as an open source initiative by a bunch of people who cared about trying to solve this for industry in general. And today, there's over 40,000 facilities globally that use it. One measure of the impact that it's had and the adoption. Very important award was in 2021. The Department of Energy funded Project Haystack under the Energy Efficiency Initiative, and it is called the Benefit Project. It's a 3-year funding to further advance the standard and implement validation tools so that people can validate that their data and their buildings have been tagged correctly and identify, missing tags or other issues, so that we get closer and closer to, if you will, seamless interoperability. Another measure of the adoption is the corporate membership. The founding members are listed here on the left. Those are the people who helped kick this off and fund the initial stage of the organization, but we have a growing number of associate members supporting the work. The links provided here will get you to Project Haystack, both the developer site where working groups work on tagging for different systems and other advances to the standard, and the marketing site. We'll find lots of resources like our magazine. We try to educate, and we issue a magazine 2 times a year, Haystack Connections magazine, and this is the last issue. The next issue is coming out in about 2 weeks. What it really demonstrates is the community-driven nature, right? Articles from end users, consulting engineers, commissioning agents, product companies, et cetera. Really shows the wide expanse of adoption. And one of the other things we do is we hold an event. And ever since the pandemic, it's been virtual. So we had a virtual event in 2021, and we have a virtual event coming up in September 13th through 15th. And we typically hold in-person events every other year and are planning one for 2023. We record the presentations ever since the pandemic, and they're all available at no cost. So that's coming up. And there's lots of other resources if you want to learn about it. But I'll finish up with the key takeaways, right? This is a method to take all of the data coming out of different systems and make it truly interoperable so that software applications can automatically read it and understand it. It's usable and understandable by technicians, the people who set up a control system or an IoT device. And it's been proven in tens of thousands of applications. And it's important to point out it's completely open source. There is zero cost to utilize it, to access all the documentation, to build it into your products, et cetera. With the end goal that we're all after, and I think everybody would agree, we want a future where a push of the button turns device data into true intelligence so that we can meet all of the goals of the different constituents in the built environment. Thanks. I'll turn it back over to you, Josh.
Excellent. Thank you, John, very, very much. Invite all the panelists to turn on their cameras and get ready for the second half of the conversation here. Quick reminder to all the attendees, I really, again, appreciate everybody who's listening in today. If you have any questions while they're on the top of your mind, feel free at any time to click the Q&A chat button, submit those questions now. And if we don't answer them here in the second half of the conversation, we'll make sure during the Q&A session we answer those questions. So, all right, everybody's ready for a little panel discussion?
Sure.
All right. I want to definitely give the audience what they've been waiting for, and that's the answer to all these questions. We threw a lot of information at them rather quickly here in the first hour, but got a few questions. I want to see what your opinion is. And the first question, we'll have a jump ball, whoever wants to take it. But if any of you guys could give me a concise problem statement for interoperability and help me understand why, after all these years of conversation about this, we're still talking about it.
I'll go.
All right, go for it, Tearle.
I won't be shy. I think because the field's expanded. I think more so than anything else that iteratively there have been solutions and problems have been solved along that journey. John highlights Haystack. Haystack absolutely was instrumental with some of the elements as you brought different systems together. Initially, everybody was focused on, give me BMS, give me lighting, give me power, and that was it. And if I get those things, then I can lower your energy reduction and improve efficiency. But that's expanded, and it's continued to expand. And those systems have evolved into wider spectrums. We used to talk about, RS-485 and serial bus and all these other types of data communications and proprietary systems. Now it's all API and, IoT protocols like MQTT. It's because the industry has expanded, we've had to see this now grow. We've solved some of the problems, but the problem list keeps growing as the industry expands.
Right. No, that's true, Tearle. Anybody else have anything to add there?
Yeah, I want to add on that because I think some of those of us who are older on the call here came from a period of time when a lot of corporations weren't open and didn't allow access to their systems, and that heritage definitely affected the industry. But I think today it is much more what Tearle says than it is bad actors refusing to let the system. There's just many more different systems. And we're seeing with the advent of IoT devices, people coming from an entirely different field with different protocols, different data formats, offering products or services of value. We're not supposed to say, well, you can't use them. So the expansion of the product, services, and domains is a key part of why there is work involved. And I think there will always be work involved. The goal we have is we should reduce that wherever possible. And what we're finding is at the data layer, this is your chance. If you add context tagging at the data layer, then all future applications, the ones we know about today, are the ones that'll pop up next year or 5 years later, can use the data without going through this painful re-engineering of the data.
Yeah.
I would add too that I think one of the major drivers here that has really opened the discussion as maybe again or a little bit differently is that the building owners and the operators, the folks who have to operate these buildings completely different than they did 10 years ago, 5 years ago, are asking for it, and they're expecting interoperability. Their other systems in their business are generally interoperable. So why shouldn't the technology that really drives their building ops and management also not be interoperable as well? I think, and then to add is that let's look back a little bit, as John said, some of us older folks here on the call who've been in the industry for a long time. If we go back 5-10 years ago, we really didn't talk about data that much, did we? I think we knew the devices, the equipment had data, but data has jumped to, has made leaps and bounds that we all agree that building owners, operators, vendors, providers, data is the foundation now of a building's operation and management.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at John's company. I mean, analytics, SkyFoundry has been around for a long, long time, and folks always wanted to get the data, get the analytics, but then they didn't know how to make, what actions to they, take. How can you be actionable with that data? And I think 10 years later, you look at it today's world, folks can actually do stuff with that data. But the disparate system, from building automation to fire and security to lighting and everything in between, there's so many different systems, and that end user, which we might as well go into my next question. It's talking about, because at the end of the day, it's all about the end user and getting them that single pane of glass that we also desperately want to get them. So let's talk about the issue from the building owner's perspective. From the business side of benefits from achieving true interoperability in buildings, and what are those owners missing out on for running disparate systems that don't do a good job as far as integration goes?
I'll take this one. I kind of want to build on the past discussion as well. I feel like it's the expansion of the industry, and it's expansion of people that care about the data. Like you said, Marc, it's not just someone cares about the data, it's all the number of stakeholders. As the industry has expanded, if you just look at like office buildings, for example, and then narrow it down also to sustainability, you could take the number of stakeholders that care about building data and go from, like Tearle, you had on your slide, building engineer, facility manager, sustainability person, but also property manager, and also, portfolio manager, service provider at each local building. You could go on and on and on and on, and eventually get to like the investors who are investing in buildings on the stock market. And the data that we have in our buildings and in our silos can be used to make all of those people's jobs easier. I think that's one of the things that's changed 100%. I also wanted to take that question, Josh, that you just asked. I think that's a great question. Like, where is the room for improvement in our silos today? I think there's 4 areas. One, I think each silo can be optimized in and of itself. Like, if you look at HVAC controlling temperature, it could get better usually at doing that, right? We could use data to do that, right? Another area is each silo could share data to other places, right, to aid in the optimization. For example, like you could share data from an IoT sensor silo into your analytics application and help improve your HVAC control. Like there's different ways to share across these different silos. Another area that I feel like when I try to explain smart buildings to people that come from this siloed mindset or the history of the industry sort of mindset, another area is a lot of times our outcomes that we're looking for, so we've been talking about outcomes, I feel like it's like the key word of the day. Our outcomes are competing with each other sometimes, right? So if you have, say, an occupant in an office building in a conference room, for example, and you're asking them to control the blinds, the lights, and the thermostats, well, that's actually going to be competing with them being productive, right? So we have these competing outcomes that we're looking for. And a lot of times the silos are not, they're just not able to take into account these different outcomes that are competing. And then finally, Tearle already said it, our silos are typically designed for one type of stakeholder. So that's why I wanted to tie this back to previous discussion. A lot of times, if you provide a software application to someone and it's coming from this siloed mindset, it's not provided in the context and in the workflow that all of these different stakeholders need. And that's why today, one application, two applications is not enough. We need applications that are designed for all of these different stakeholders that care about using this data in a bunch of different ways. And that's what's really expanding, and it's really exciting for me.
I think
Awesome.
that convergence is really where they're missing out on that convergence of ability and value. And I think one of those things that having gone through and tried to itemize ROI on each individual delivery as a package of, oh, this is a solution and this is a solution. And if you look at the value, sometimes they don't achieve maximum value when they're in their own independent silo. When complementary and converged with the other systems, you get all of the other ability, the delivery and the value comes to light, not just economic, but in all the other pieces of experience and other goals that those stakeholders are trying to achieve. You just get
echo,
the more you tie it together, the better it gets.
and to echo what you said about convergence, I mean, today, one of the fastest part of our buildings that are converging are our traditional operational side, the HVAC, the lighting, the stuff we've been doing for years, and the workplace, the newer workplace applications. And can you imagine that today the pressure a building owner is under to go, all right, I normally in the good old days, I ran my building for the 500 tenants or occupants that came in. Today, that doesn't happen. Again, with the hybrid work models and stuff like that, as an owner, I want to be able to operate the building based on true or close to true occupancy levels and where the individuals are actually within that building. If they're not on the 6th floor or the 8th floor, for example, do I need to have my comfort levels and my environments running at full maximum capacity? And so again, this whole convergence now of the workplace and the traditional operational side is coming front and center, and all of that needs to be interoperable with each other, as I see it.
Yeah. Well, hey, Marc, so with that being said, and we know, James laid it out perfectly. There's so many stakeholders involved in, with a building, big or small, but whose job is it to develop a clear statement, of the need for the end result, just like the Miami project that you kicked the session off with? Who's in charge of developing that, and how do they, if there's multiple parties, how do they collaborate to get that desired end result?
I mean, one of the interesting newer forms of titles that I'm seeing, yet small, and this person would be ideal for it, is a chief smart building officer, is the person who basically the buck stops with them. Facility reports into them, ops, that has to do with the building. But today, it's in my opinion, it's not one person. It's going to be a combination thereof, of obviously the facility folks, the head of facility or facilities, as well as some of the folks within the C-suite, because they're the ones, in my opinion, are looking for the business outcomes that all of us talk about. We've got the technology today. It's about those outcomes that are producing the value that we talked about earlier.
Got it. Anybody want to add anything else? Oh, sorry, Tearle.
Oh, no, it's fine. I think you need that organizational alignment, like Mark's talking about. I've seen it work very functionally, and I've seen some dysfunction in some experiences where if you have really clear vision at the top, here's what we're going to do. You have supportive structure underneath that vision of capability, delivery, and the ability to articulate it. And some cases, it's a suite of other providers. I know, sometimes it's a third-party vendor, sometimes it's parallel organizations within the company that all have to come together. And, it comes back to the adage, it takes a village. It takes a village to raise a smart building. And it does have to come together that way.
Well said.
One of the things that, in conversations that I have with building owners and operators is this. They understand integration. They don't understand interoperability. They think integration is interoperability.
Yeah.
So,
and I think some of that comes to the why. I know a recent-ish project there, we were working through some specifics around taking a smart building application and platform and working through CMMS integration. And consistently from several business leaders, there was an ask of why? What is that going to do for me? And many cases you have to come back and really highlight the value. To some of us in the industry, it seems like a no-brainer. But at the same time, other leaders are saying, well, you're consuming this number of hours, this amount of budget. Why are you doing that? And we had to show, here's the efficiencies that gain from the system. Here are capabilities that are unlocked. Here's adoption of the platform that wouldn't have been achieved if we hadn't linked these two systems together and brought them so you get faster, streamlined delivery across the board. So really coming back to make sure you answer the why for those business leaders so that they don't walk off and think you don't have value and interest.
Yeah, end of the day, you got to give the customer what they're looking for and prioritize what's going to get the greatest impact to their organization. All right. Well, for time, I'm going to move forward. Marc did bring up vendors, and it's definitely, I think it's an important topic because every vendor creates products and solutions that they believe is going to make an impact to their customers. But just want to talk generically about the role that vendors are playing in either solving this problem or just kicking the can down the road. Just about every vendor will tout their systems are capable of interoperability. But do you guys think that's truly the case, or is it necessary to look very closely at the fine print?
I think the question is, how much effort does it take, right? Okay, you can integrate to it, depending on whether you're willing to go through the effort. Okay, that's different than what we need to achieve for the future of the built environment, which is systems are just interoperable, easily interoperable. Maybe not zero work, but far less. So I think in some ways that we're seeing things slide backwards because there's so many new vendors coming in, again, from outside, the BMS industry with great new devices. They may not understand all these things. They say, hey, it's open. You figure out what to do with it. Well, great. That doesn't help the end user. Again, nobody would think about publishing a website that didn't adhere to HTML today, right? Because nobody could read it. Well, we haven't reached that level of understanding, but I want to go back to one of, I think Marc and Tearle both said it, society is becoming more aware of using data. So there's a factor that's positive that's helping us, then that owners say, of course I should be able to work with all the data from these systems. Why doesn't your system let me do that easily? But we need to move faster than that if we're really going to accomplish this for building owners and help us. Tearle said, hey, what are you guys spending money on? Well, if the systems were interoperable, we'd be spending way less money to get to these end goals and outcomes.
Yeah, no, and I think we all saw that in Orlando, last month at RealCom. It's incredible the amount of different solutions that are out there. That everything does, very similar things. Some have, do some things better than others, but yeah, it's incredible. What about focus, or James? Did you have?
Yeah, I think a little part of the problem, and this kind of builds on what John was saying, which is I totally agree with. I think part of the problem is that there are a lot of folks that are primarily participating, if we think back to the layers, participating at the device layer. Their secret sauce is a device that they're manufacturing and selling and providing in to be part of this, overall solution. And I think right now, I think device manufacturers only make a token effort to make their systems interoperable today. And that's a very broad statement. That's just my feeling about if you can make a broad statement, I'd say that'd be it. But I'd say there's a piece that I would go beyond that and say their business models, and they kind of want to provide the whole stack, right? So we talk about the horizontal architecture, providing a horizontal stack. Vendors need to realize that they're only part of the solution, right? They're not the entire solution. And especially in the context of this conversation, as we talked about all these different use cases, all these different stakeholders, there's way too many different lenses to view data for one vendor to provide the stack. And so I think what I'd say about vendors is they need to figure out where they play, right? And where they don't play and how they play with everybody else. That's sort of part of the bigger solution.
I think it's the good and the bad of it's a vastly widening, rapidly widening field and market. And so there are new vendors coming all the time. Even as you select, I've got the best solution. Here's my best fault detection stack, and here's the best cloud provider I want to use. But then every day there's something new that somebody comes along and has a really great demo and a great presentation. All of a sudden an executive is tapping you on the shoulder going, hey, did you see this new solution? Can you go do a write-up on them and then provide the pros and cons and the value add? And like, oh, well, okay, we can look at it, but there's always more. And it's good. It's good for the market, but it provides challenges for the rest of us.
Yeah. And Tearle, in your old role, it wasn't just building control systems, right? I mean, were you taking expanding into looking at different application processes to increase efficiencies, or how did you prioritize?
Yeah, I mean, as we spoke about, as the industry evolved, it started with go get power meters and then run fault detection and integrate BMS. But those layers continued to progress, and the customer's needs really needed to progress. I was, blessed to have a client for many years in Microsoft that was very forward thinking and engaging and wanted us to expand and innovate. So we looked at everything from solar panels, digital signage, digital ceilings, parking counters, anything and everything, integrated fire extinguishers. It was, use cases that some of them paid out, some of them didn't. And as that integration of physical assets grew, we also started to see the advent of the cloud, and a lot of software applications and providers step forward with API-centric integrations and IoT hubs and all of these other elements, and now started to widen the market even further. And all of a sudden, we went from save energy to I need a happy place that all my clients, all my occupants want to come to, and what are you doing to facilitate that? And then analytics come into play, and it's awesome because it provides us a never-ending playground that we get to keep developing in. But it's a widening spectrum.
And that's the world. James is living in that world. Real quick, John, I'm interested with what James has to say as far as applications. That's the world that you're living in, James. Over the last, call it 3 to 5 years, have you seen an uptick in any one application over another where end users are seeing a better ROI because they were educated about this application route and you were able to implement it?
Yeah. I think of it like the adoption curve, right? The technology adoption curve. There are some technologies that are being considered as more mainstream these days. I'd say fault detection, you mentioned, is definitely one of them that's being viewed, especially the bigger and bigger the building, being viewed as more like a basic set of operating tools that you would use to run a building. Another piece of this is energy, and there's a bunch of different acronyms for them: energy management information systems. Now it's kind of bleeding into ESG reporting a little bit, where you have this spectrum of different technologies that helps you understand meter data better, right? And it depends on what you're doing with that data and who you're serving the application to. But that it seems to be taking off, especially as you get into these more regulated industries where you need to comply with different reporting standards and that kind of thing. The thing I'd say, though, is that when we look at the buildings industry, there really is no one homogeneous industry, right? Because if you look at, I always like to think of it like a spectrum. You have the biggest building, the biggest campus with the most money on one side, and then you have the 20,000 square foot Class C office building that has a single owner on the other side. That is a very, very, very diverse spectrum. And I think when we get over to that other side, it represents a significant portion of buildings, 98% of buildings in the US, about 45% of the energy usage. If you look at those subset of buildings, most of them don't even have a building automation system at this point. Most of them don't even have digital systems at all. Therefore, you can't really even provide them an application. And so there's this wide spectrum that I always like to remind people of, that we have a long way to go in terms of just getting data from a building, and these smaller buildings especially.
And I want to just, sorry, I don't know how we're doing on time, but I want to jump in a little bit to what James said and put yourself in a building owner operator's perspective. In that, all right, one is if I adopt these solutions, one is I have a fear that I'm going to fail, first and foremost. So let's look in this mindset. Two is making the shift for smarter buildings seems daunting to a building owner today. Where the heck do I start? Where do I begin? And I think, unfortunately, we as an industry have created a perception, and this echoes, James, what you were just saying, that we've created a perception that it's either got to be an all or nothing approach, and that the solutions are only good for larger buildings, multi-site campuses, etc. And then there's the whole, what I've termed the whole flood of the hip and hype being thrown at me as a building owner every single day.
Every single day, the last sales guy through the door with the best idea. So.
Well, Mark, I think one of the things that we as an industry have to be very conscious of, and I agree with you wholly in that you look at coming from a former real estate company with a very wide, billions of square feet, to James' point, many of those, if you're talking small walk-up retail, they're not going to have the ROI on a large package energy optimization plan. I need something that can drop in at low cost and get data fast and get solutions fast. And it's got to be a tiered approach. Even some of them, it's just, please, retro commissioning. Send a body in and go do it until we can get you smart. And then ideally, then you have a nice glide path of solutions that highlight all of the different options along the way and build you up maybe to the full package later.
I agree with you, but I'll just say this, that you mentioned retail. Retail is one of the fastest growing segments within the controls, I don't know, however you want to say it, marketing segments that there are. Because again, I think they're realizing not only energy, but there's several other things that retailers are looking that they have to do in today's time, where their margins are so bloody small and getting smaller each and every day.
John, I'm sorry, did you have something you wanted to add earlier?
I did, and it relates to one of the questions that's been posted by the audience. Maybe it'd be helpful there. Somebody said, well, it seems the attributes outlined in Project Haystack are built into BACnet. My simple example may align with what's in BACnet. I'd encourage people who are trying to learn, go look at what the work that's being done in Project Haystack working groups. For example, one good example would be the VRF, Variable Refrigeration Flow working group, right? There with people from industry who are full supporters of BACnet are working together to build out the tagging model for VRF systems, which is far beyond anything that's in BACnet. But the most important point about that isn't, how much BACnet covers versus how much Haystack covers. The point is, what if you don't have a BACnet system? What if it's MQTT? What if it's Modbus? What if it's OPCUA? What if it's SNMP from IT equipment because they have temperatures and cooling information in the IT? There is no one protocol that can solve this. What we need to do is have a layer of descriptors above any of the protocols, right? That's really the issue here, right? I've got an API. How am I going to add context to the data I get out of that in a uniform way? So it's the protocols can't solve it on their own because it's a higher level challenge.
Thanks, John. Anybody else have anything to add before we get into our fun lightning round and save some time for Q&A? All right, you guys ready to have a little bit of fun and bring this to the home stretch?
Yeah, what are our rules again?
All right, so the rules: no eye gouging. No, it's
No rules. This is like robot
No.
fighting, whatever.
No holds barred.
no holds barred. Yeah, virtual no holds barred. But all right, so each of you, I've got 4 questions, and each of you has got a minute or so. There are no buzzers that are going to be going off, but definitely want you to elaborate and so the audience can get something out of it. But after each question, and we'll start with Marc, you can answer yes, no, or I'll give you the chance to plead the 5th Amendment if you would like. So yeah, we'll go. Let's start with Marc, and then we'll go around the horn. This problem, building interoperability, should have been solved long before now.
Yes. And I think we had the technology to do it, but we did not have the wherewithal to consider the value of interoperability.
Great. Tearle, the problem should have been solved long before now.
No, I think as we touched on earlier, because of the expanding solution and stakeholder set, the field is blowing up at such a degree we couldn't have had all of these solved yet, but we've made good progress along the way.
Good. James.
I agree.
Short and sweet. I like it. John.
Yeah, I agree. Again, I think we got to get out of the mindset that this is somehow created by malintent and start working together, right, on solving the problem.
Got it. All right, great. Thank you, guys. All right, question number 2. Very few building owners really understand the problems created by disparate building systems. And we'll keep the same order just to keep it simple. Marc.
I agree with the statement, and that's all I will say on that subject.
All right, Tearle.
Yeah, I have to agree with it. It is smart buildings are not simple, unfortunately.
I think there's 2 layers here that I think they understand the end outcomes that we're talking about, right? Here today, like hitting sustainability goals or not hitting them, wasting operating expenses, losing a tenant. I think they understand that, obviously, right? That's their business, but they don't understand the nerdy technical details around interoperability and everything in the weeds. And I think a lot of times we as an industry, if there is one smart buildings industry, we hang out down here. And we probably should hang out a little bit more up there.
Yeah, those building owners, they care about that, that user interface. That's what they really care about. But there's so much data. John.
Yeah.
Real quick. Sorry, John. I don't think they care about user interface either. They don't care about they don't want to log in if they don't need to, right? They care about the end outcomes, and a user interface is not an end outcome.
Autonomous buildings. Okay.
I'll follow up on that instead of answering the questions. A long time ago, when I was showing somebody, generations ago, user interface, the building owner just looked at me and go, if the system controls the building, why would I need to look at the computer? And it was like, wow, right? Why do I need to look at it? So, just another perspective. I think that gets at one of the big challenges here. it is a complicated thing to achieve those outcomes. And we need to make sure that the owner's representative somewhere in this value stack understands that. It's great that the investment organization doesn't want to hear about any of this, but to get to that end goal, people have to appreciate the steps that are involved. And if they did, they'd be helping push the industry towards better interoperability because they're footing the bill when it's hard.
Oh, great. Thank you, John. All right, next question. A widely accepted universal nomenclature will be adopted by 2025.
You're back to me.
I'm back to you, Marc.
I plead the fifth.
All right, Tearle.
I feel like with John and Marc on the call, I ought to plead the fifth, so I don't incriminate myself. But unfortunately, I think I think the answer is no. I wish we were. I just don't. I don't know that it's happening because there's even newer ontologies and ontologies that are coming along to try to solve the problem by creating a newer one, and one of them will emerge. One system to rule them all, hopefully. But until then, we're still on the journey to Mordor.
I think we should have a rule here that says John can't plead the fifth. He has to answer this. But I'm going to say nomenclature is only part of the problem, right? So John laid out naming, space, relationships, physical phenomena. That's not just nomenclature, right? And I'd say no. Also, I don't think it's going to happen. I think if you look at the progress that's been made in the last 2 years, and then we only have 2 years till 2025, essentially at this point, right? If you project that progress forward, I don't think we're anywhere near there. But yeah, defer to John on this topic for sure.
I agree. No, I don't think we will. I think we are collectively industry's making a lot of progress, but new approaches are coming out, and those organizations need to find a way to work together because we don't need 5 versions of HTML. We need 1 version. And I haven't seen enough groundswell appreciation for that. We've reached out at Haystack to work with other organizations. This can be solved with a single metadata standard, but no, I don't believe it will be by then. But whichever one people choose to use, going through the process to apply a metadata standard, whichever one they choose, puts them further ahead than they were before they did that. So,
all right, that's good. All right, well, let me add 5 years onto that question. And our last question here in the lightning round, Mr. Petock, this will not be a topic at SBX 2030 because the problem will be solved. Your thoughts?
I think we will have the wherewithal to solve it, no question. But will the industry accept it? No. How's that for a politician answer?
That was very politically correct. Tearle?
I don't think we'll have it solved because I don't believe it will be a steady state solution problem. It will be an evolution. So by 2030, we'll have significantly evolved it as we did in 2010 to now. But it will not be solved because it will still be continuing to evolve.
All right. James, and I know you have to run off here early, but you can answer this question before you go.
Yeah, I think I have a politician answer as well. I think I'll go back to my building industry as a spectrum comment. I think that all buildings are going to experience this change differently. So, and some of them could take a really long time. But I'll go and say, I think there'll be a roadmap. So like if that anyone can follow. So if I have a building, I can follow. I don't know what the roadmap is yet. We're not there, I don't think. But I think by that time, it will be clear if I'm a building owner and I have a portfolio, it will be clear how I can, navigate and, what my plan should be. And I think it will also be clear how each vendor can participate in that roadmap. But right now it's hard to imagine that.
But to your point, James, is can participate. That's one thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
If they choose to participate, that's the whole thing. And again, let's look at our industry. That's been one of the biggest challenges that we face each and every day.
Yeah. James, if you could put that roadmap together on your flight on the way to your honeymoon.
My honeymoon. Well, I do have to leave. Thanks so much for having me. Sorry, I have to get out early. Everyone knows how travel is these days, and I have a little emergency. So
Hey,
have fun. See you later.
James, have fun on the honeymoon.
Thanks.
All right, John.
Yeah,
finish this off.
we will still be talking about it in 2030. It'll still be a topic. I won't be there though.
Yeah, it's the torch. You got to share all that knowledge so somebody will keep carrying that torch. So,
Passing it on.
all right, I'm going to invite Britton on. We've got a few questions that came in from the audience. With the time remaining, we're going to answer some of those questions. And if anybody else has anything else they'd like to ask the panelists here, please go ahead and put in your question.
Thanks, Josh. Great discussion, folks. Like, huge amount of learning happening over here. Thanks for participating and for the panel. We've had a few questions come in, so I'm going to start with a question from Joe Cook. I think this is really getting at the point of whenever folks start talking about data and letting systems speak to each other inside a building, folks get concerned about any cybersecurity risks that might arise from that. So this question is, how is cybersecurity maintained when integrating this interoperability into mission critical applications? And they cite security or cooling for process loads. So is this a concern? Does this affect that, let's say, calculation around how to protect your building from cyber risks? And Josh, I'll let you direct that as needed to the specific panelists.
Yeah, no, I'm sure all of our panelists have experienced this in real life. So see who would like to take the lead on that question.
All right.
Yeah.
It has to be designed in because we have such diverse systems. There's no single answer to it, right? But it absolutely can and is taken care of satisfactorily constantly. All kinds of huge projects that involve different types of systems achieve high levels of cybersecurity. In some ways, the application of these overlay applications can become the security boundary for the older, previously insecure, they just don't have the technology in order to be secure. So it can be done, but there's no single answer to that. You have to look at your network architecture. You have to look at how you let people in to what applications, how you're validating their, authenticating that those users can get in there. It's part of the design of the system.
And it needs to be part of the discussion when the building owner, the technology provider, the system integrator, all the folks who may be involved in this, it needs to be part of that discussion, and it needs to be mapped out as part of the strategy and everything else. If you just continue, we want to make all this stuff interoperable and not bring in the security aspect, cybersecurity aspect, you're missing it right there. You're doomed to fail.
I think the industry is setting the greasing the skids because of smart buildings. The industry as a whole is pivoting more in the IT direction from our traditional OT networks. I think what you're seeing, having done system integration assessments, coming into a traditional building engineer environment and finding, a desktop under the chief engineer's desk and pass set on the top of his screen and going, really? This is how we're operating the system? You come in with a lot more of those principles. And I think what we're seeing is a maturation of the industry. Cybersecurity's become core. You're seeing application of security in layers, core security principles are being applied. There's still more room to go, and there's still, because of threats and because of breaches, we're seeing a strong pivot to zero trust networking and hardened infrastructure that's going to continue to progress, making it more complex for interoperability, but it doesn't preclude interoperability.
Thank you, Tearle.
Okay, I think we have time for one more, and there's one more question in here. Okay, so and this is from Conrad Jarling of Watts. Besides ASHRAE 223P, Thread, BACnet, et cetera, are there other standards protocols we should be on the lookout for that are either here or coming up that we should keep in mind for interoperability? And which ones do you think might be going by the wayside?
I don't think any are going to go by the wayside. I think that's one of the challenges of the industry. And one of the oldest digital protocols is still one of the most used, and that's Modbus, a very, if you will, simple protocol that when you bring it into these systems, you have to add all the contextual information via tagging or some other methods. So I don't think they're going away. There's a lot of talk about MQTT, which is a communication protocol, but it actually doesn't include the semantic definition of what the data payload is, right? So you have to deal with it on that side. And then you have new software APIs, right? So, there's going to, I think, continue to be development in this area, just like there has been in conventional wire protocols, right? We've got LoRaWAN out there and, Zigbee and all of those. So that's why I think, we just have to realize there's going to be work in this area forever and continuing because of the addition of technology to the buildings.
And I think as these protocols continue to evolve, that they will have to address interoperability in order to participate in the true value of a smart, connected, better performing building, however the audience wants to go ahead and define that. If not, then they'll be kept out and they will not achieve what they had hoped as far as adoption of their respective protocol.
I think you'll see maturation of it. Some of it's going to come together. It's similar to the IT networking and the OSI layers. They're ultimately, there was over enough years and enough market surge and pressure, they converged into, for the most part, fairly consistent. You plug a RJ45 into your machine, everything works. You connect to Wi-Fi now, everything works. At some point, and a lot of the OEM providers have pushed there, where 10 years ago we were dragging them kicking and screaming to get to BACnet, and now most of these protocols are all now supported. Most of the IoT protocols, MQTT, AMQP, are all being supported. Wireless first is all coming together. It's getting there. It's just we still have to meet the clients where they are. So,
yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Tearle. John, Marc, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge today. I definitely learned several new things. I'm sure our audience got a lot of the conversations and all the presentations. So thank you very, very much for your time today.